The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. My name is Courtney Pollock, and I'm the Marketing Coordinator for SWK Technologies. We'd like to welcome you to our webinar, Are You Surviving or Thriving? How Healthcare Organizations Can Thrive in 2022, presented by Linda Pinion from Sage Intacct. A little housekeeping before we get started. Everyone has been placed on mute to keep the background noise to a minimum. However, throughout the webinar, you can submit any questions you have. If you'd like to submit a question, look for the questions section in your GoToWebinar, and we will answer all your questions at the end of the presentation. We're also recording this presentation, and it will be distributed tomorrow to all attendees, as well as those who registered but were unable to attend. And finally, we would appreciate your participation throughout the webinar in any polling questions and Q&A. With that said, we appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to attend this webinar. We're here to help you get the most out of your software solutions and help you find an easier way to run your business by providing you with tools, support, software, and industry knowledge whenever you need it. So whether you're here researching a new solution or you're just here to learn, we'd like to encourage you to ask any questions you have. And lastly, as a quick reminder, SWK is constantly sharing important updates and software tips and tricks on our social media channels. We'd like to encourage you to follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And with that said, I'll hand it over to Linda.
Thank you so much, Courtney, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for investing some time with us today. Courtney and I enjoy bringing these presentations to you, and today is an important one. As a principal solution consultant at Intacct, one of the things that I do on a regular basis is meet with companies like yourself and discuss your business requirements. And as part of that gathering of your business requirements, put together solution presentations. Along the way, because I have been here for 12 years, I have been recruited to be a speaker and somewhat the voice of Sage Intacct. I do a lot of presentations. You may have seen me at some events or listened to some recorded assets. Happy to be here today and to share the knowledge that I have around healthcare with you. When you think about any specific vertical, there's really some key things in each vertical that are happening. And today we're going to focus on the healthcare vertical and start out by giving you a little bit of the State of the Union. I know that's something that all of us understand. It's a little bit of a health check, if you will, on how we're doing and what we're doing. And then we want to talk a little bit about where you are in your journey. So healthcare and what's happening in healthcare, and then where are you in your healthcare journey. Then I'll move to introduce you to Sage Intacct, and then we'll follow up with a specific customer story and some results, and then just a few highlights from some other customers and some of the impact that moving to Sage Intacct has had for them. We'll finish up with some Q&A. So as Courtney said, please post your questions, and then we'll close out today with next steps and resources. In any industry, it's really important to understand what's important to them. And as you may have gathered, if you've been to our website, you know that we work across many different verticals and different industries. But one thing that is consistent in every industry and every vertical is people are moving to the cloud. So healthcare is no different. Individual companies, groups of companies, management companies, they're all seeing the benefit of moving to the cloud and that value proposition. In addition, some of the things that are happening all across the United States and really the country entirely, is people are growing through consolidation. You have smaller organizations being acquired by larger organizations, forming these consortiums of companies. And so being able to have a bigger footprint sometimes means that you need to reevaluate processes and systems and solutions. As you move into that growth period, of course, you want to make sure that you're controlling your cost. And everyone is very cost conscious. As we know, inflation is rising, seems to be every hour in our world today. But the cost of supplies, the cost of services, so anything we can do that reduces that cost and gives us a plan to look at our budgets and to understand what we're spending our dollars on. At the same time, you know, one of the things that faces healthcare specifically is regulatory requirements. So there's always something new on the horizon that we're needing to meet from a compliance perspective. And then, you know, shifting to that consumer-driven healthcare. How has healthcare changed today? Well, I know personally, a lot of things have changed for me and for Sage Intacct. You know, one of the things that we've done is we've changed healthcare providers, and that's not something that's unusual. That happens to lots of companies. Sometimes it seems like every year you're changing providers. But when you change providers, those providers have new tools and they have new ways of doing things. We've all been introduced to telehealth now. So no longer do we have to go and physically sit in a doctor's office in order to get prescriptions, to get our checkups and to get that attention that we need. So there's a lot of things that consumers are driving, and technology is really driving us more into that consumer-driven healthcare. One of the things that I believe is really important is, from a personal standpoint, is knowing your numbers, knowing your blood pressure and some of those key indicators that maybe your body's not performing at its optimum. And at the same time, you can take all of that and apply it to your business. So you may know Marcus Lemonis from the show on TV called The Prophet. You may have seen that on CNBC. His comment here is, if you don't know your numbers, you don't know your business. He's kind of a turnaround guy. And very interesting, because this is true in businesses. You need to know what's going on in your business. You need to know the numbers. And maybe you don't even know what numbers you really need to know about. What are those key industry numbers that you should be looking at? Maybe you should be comparing yourself and looking at some benchmarks. But what are those benchmarks that should be important to you? And do you know what your business is doing today, and how are you tracking that? Along the way, most of us would say, oh my gosh, you know, that just means we've got to have more data. We've just got to gather more data, and we're just drowning in data. And some of that is really true. We have more data today than we've ever had. So having the information is not always the challenge here. It's more about, once you have that data, what do you do with it? And, you know, just like that bicycle that's in the garage gathering cobwebs, you know, it's not until you decide where you're going and map out your route that you realize it's really a benefit of owning the bike. So what we need to determine is, what data do we have, and what should we be doing with that data? How do we access that information? There's some common pain points for healthcare organizations. For many healthcare facilities, whether it's a clinic, it's a senior community, it's, you know, a dermatology office, group of offices, dental doctor, just different types of facilities in healthcare. For many of them, they are all running or utilizing their own solution. So there's no integration. They've got data in some sort of an accounting solution. They've got data in a billing solution. They've got a whole host of Excel spreadsheets on everyone's desktop. So the data is scattered. It's not in one place. And the reliability of all of that data is pretty slim, because we don't know if it's up to date. We don't know if there were any mistakes or errors made. And because we do a lot in spreadsheets, we're prone to making mistakes. It's easy to make a mistake and, as we say, fat finger something and get the wrong number in the wrong cell. And if you're utilizing that to make business decisions, then you're really looking at the wrong information. As you approach your activities during the month, you're gearing up and leading up to that month-end close. And having been part of the close team before, when I was in accounting, I know that that's a critical time. No one could take off during that 5-day period of getting the books closed. And there was a lot of extra work, a lot of checking and rechecking, a lot of duplicate entry of information, just making sure that we had everything ready to go before we printed those final reports. So having that long and cumbersome time frame to get the month closed is a common pain area for lots of organizations. When we talked about data a minute ago, I said we have lots of data, and it's all about accessing that data, and that's what visibility is. How do you get to it? Do you have to run a report? Do you have to call someone? Do you have to take some spreadsheets and consolidate them together? So how do I get visibility to that information? And then understanding how we're going to take that from where we are today and go back to that point about growing your business. If you are just hanging on by your teeth today and you go out and acquire another business, or your business grows, you have a growth spurt, if you're just hanging on today, how will you manage that growth? How will you continue to grow without adding more people, without adding more and more and more? And the more you add, the more you open that up to more dollars spent, more investment, and you're not really working efficiently. So introducing Sage Intacct is a way for you to see that there is a better way and another way that you can approach this. So if this is your first time to learn about Intacct, I would encourage you to visit our website to learn a little bit more about us as a company. But the product itself has been around since 1999. And what's important for you to know is that it is a proven path of success for over 16,000 companies. From its initial conception, it was developed and designed and architected as a native cloud solution. Now, what that means is it was always architected for the cloud. It was never an on-premise solution that morphed into a cloud solution. It's never been but in that one flavor, and that's cloud. And having your data in the cloud means that you have access to it 24/7, 365, as long as you have the proper permissions. That data is secure. We, as the publisher, house that data in 2 different data centers. So it is our responsibility to keep up with the data in those data centers to make sure that it is secure, that it is backed up, there are recovery processes defined. So all of that is on us as the publisher of the software. So when you think about that, that gives you a lot of freedom. And it also gives you a lot of comfort to know that, you know, this is what's on our side of the responsibility list. Now, a couple of other things that we've done that are very specific to our solution is we've introduced something called dimensions. And dimensions allow us to further define a transaction utilizing one or more of the 12 predefined dimensions in the system. And those dimensions are what we tag to transactions that tell the story of that transaction. And you'll hear and see dimensions in action when we get into the solution, but it allows us at a very high level, very simple statement, it allows us to produce very granular and detailed reporting. So if you want to report by facility, by item, by department, by location, by vendor. So these are all ways that you can take data and you can filter it so that you get it at the level that is what you're looking for. It's also about real-time information. So this is different than maybe what you're used to, where transactions get entered and then sometime tomorrow you see the effect of those transactions. This is real-time, up-to-date information. The minute I post that transaction, it is in the general ledger. It is reflective in all of your reporting and your dashboards. We also have a different model, and our model is called best in class. And at the core, this is a model that allows you to have the best solution for every area of your organization. So our best in class, Sage Intacct's best in class, is financial management. That's what we eat, sleep, breathe. In healthcare, it's not unusual for you to have specialized billing applications, as an example, that are very tuned to how you need to bill in your particular area of healthcare. And you may be using those today and they may be perfectly fine. They're working like a champ and there's no reason for you to replace them. You love that part, however, the accounting is not where it needs to be. And that is a perfect example of where Sage Intacct fits. And that is because we were architected to take the data from that billing system and integrate it into our financial management solution. And that gives you, I like to say, your cake and eat it too, or the best of everything, because now you get the best billing system and you get the best financial management solution. On the right-hand side, as you look at this, in the core, it's the cloud platform. You'll see that in one area we have the core financials. Other additional modules are by subscription and choice. If you need them, great. If you don't, you won't subscribe to them. And then, of course, at the top, just highlighting that we do have industry-specific solutions, healthcare being one of them and being a very strong one, and we'll understand that more as we go along. So just picking up the pace a little bit here, just to make sure that you are on board with what we are focused on today from a solutioning standpoint. We're going to be looking at what we call a multi-entity solution today. And multi-entity is the same thing as multi-company. So anything that is labeled entity or company, we look at that as a separate tax ID. What that affords you is the ability to set up as many entities or companies as you choose to and manage them all in one instance of Sage Intacct. As we go along, we'll see that we can take those entities and we can do those consolidations for you on the fly very quickly. We can also automate those elimination entries if that's something that needs to be done. And across all of our processes, you'll see that we have defined them as automated and streamlined them as much as possible so that you're not re-entering data. You don't have to worry about does the process fit your process, because we give you the ability to define your business processes. If you are an organization that needs to be HIPAA compliant, this is a very, very important box to check, if you will. And there are many solutions out there that are not HIPAA compliant. So this is something that if you need it, you need it. It's a requirement. And Intacct is happy to say that we can check that box and we can deliver on HIPAA compliance. All of this being housed in a best-in-class modern cloud platform. As I said earlier, our model is different. Our model is best in class. And again, just a representation here visually of what that might look like. So in the center, for us accounting folks, we always say all roads lead to the general ledger. So everything comes into Sage Intacct. So whether you're using maybe something like Salesforce for your customer relationship management, managing some of your marketing campaigns or leads, if you're using Avalara for sales tax, maybe utilizing a payroll solution, all of those can integrate into Sage Intacct. So we become that hub, and we are housing that information so that you can then use our financial reporting at that granular level. All of those dimensions that I mentioned earlier, those dimensions are housed in these other best-in-class applications as well. So we are creating dimensionalized data that comes into Sage Intacct for reporting. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the software. Courtney's going to give me permission to share my screen. While she's doing that, don't forget that we love your questions. If you have questions, please don't hesitate to offer those questions up, because we want to make this interactive. We want to make sure that we get your questions answered. If we don't answer a question while we're on the call today, we'll make sure and follow up with you afterwards. So Courtney, before I get crazy here, can you see my screen okay?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So again, just remember that this is Sage Intacct. It's a multi-entity, entity equals company, environment that I am showing you today. And in fact, I am managing multiple entities. There are 5 of them, and they're here in this drop down. So you can see from Texas to Scenic Shores, those are the names of my, I'm calling them facilities because that's my terminology. And that's another thing that you will be able to do in Sage Intacct, is change some of that terminology so that it feels comfortable to your team. And we find that that's important, because when people move from one system to another, having that continuity and being comfortable and feeling good about that transition is important. It's important for your folks to have a good feeling about where they're going and what they're switching to. So I've logged in as Emma, and Emma is the controller. I'm pretty much going to stay focused on Emma. However, I will talk here about the different kinds of users for a moment. So Emma, being the controller, she's a super user in that I've opened up all the permissions for her. So 2 things about Emma. Emma can transact in all of these different entities. I've given her that permission, and she also has access to all of the different applications within the software. So when I look at her menu, it's very full, and there are lots of areas that she can transact. I've set those permissions specifically open for Emma because that is her role. However, I have someone else that I have logged in as today, And this person is an employee user, and her name is Nikki. And Nikki has been restricted. And the restrictions that have been placed on her is she can only transact in Texas. That's the only facility or entity that she can work in. And from a application perspective, you can see that she's very limited. In fact, when she looks at purchasing, she can only do requisitions. She doesn't have permission to enter a purchase order. And this is intentional. So I have set her up this way, and you as the administrator of your Sage Intacct instance, you'll be able to set up your own users and control and maintain their permissions. So one of the things that I just said was that I was managing multiple facilities. So as the controller, you know, one of the things that I want to do is I want to get that snapshot picture of how I'm tracking or how the business is performing. And I want it as a consolidated view. So the first thing I'm going to focus on are these two rows of boxes. And these are what we call performance cards. You might consider them key performance indicators. A performance card houses information about a certain area of accounts in your chart. So here, these are the general and administrative expenses. So it's a combination. In this case, it is a consolidated number. It represents $52,000, which is across all of my facilities. So across these 5, they so far have $52,000 worth of expenses. And I'm comparing this to a previous month. I could compare it to a previous period, like a quarter, a year. I could also compare it to a budget. And then I can ask for a visual indicator. And so quickly, if I wanted to just look at this, if I saw green, that means good. And if I see red, that's not so good. So maybe those are the things I need to go in and take a look at. So when I look at this, I say, well, that's great. You know, I've got that quick business insight. However, today, I don't want to look at that consolidated view. I just want to look at one of my facilities. So I'm going to choose to look at Texas, and I'm going to apply what's called a dashboard filter. And that dashboard filter now has taken everything and filtered it based on the specific facility of Texas. And you'll notice that my expenses have gone down to $33,000. That's Texas's portion of that $52,000. So this is a way for me, just by using some dashboard filters, to not need to create more reports, not need to create more dashboards. I can just slice and dice the data. Now, there's other ways that I may want to see it. I've chosen 3 different ways for this dashboard. I've chosen facility, I chose vendor, so if I just wanted to see it based on a vendor, and I've also chosen item. So I could pull in these other dimensions to do dashboard filtering. I can just as easily come back, get that consolidated view again, and along the way, I might want to use this as of date as another way to filter. So most of my demo data is in 2018, but if I wanted to, I could backdate this to November of 2018, and that would refresh the dashboard, and I could see exactly how I looked as of November instead of December. So lots of ways for me to filter this data very quickly at the dashboard level. Now, what's also important to me is to understand where this information is coming from. So how in the world did I get to $52,000 in G&A expenses? And looking at that means I want to drill into the detail. So as I drill into it, I can see, gosh, my office supplies are $11,000 for December. They were only $7,800 for November. I wonder what's going on here. So let's drill into those office supplies, and we can see all the transactions that have occurred, and we can individually choose transactions that we may want to know more about. So drilling into this bill from American Express, I can see that, you know, it's about $1,000 and it hasn't been paid yet. And I really would like to understand, you know, what's going on. I can see that the bill has been coded to office supplies, and it was charged or coded also to a specific department in that Texas facility. So taking an AP bill, coding it, and identifying department and facility tells me the story of the transaction. So it gives me the detail. The other thing that could help me is an attachment. So I can have an attachment that is a document, a picture. It could be a folder that has documents inside of it, like you would have for employee expenses. You put receipts in a folder. I could attach the whole folder here. I can drag and drop those attachments right from my desktop. So when I look at this information, it begins to tell me a little bit more about the transaction. If I look a little bit further, I can also see, well, Emma was the one that actually created this expense. So she is the employee. Employee is another one of those dimensions. She is the employee that wanted these office supplies. So now I can track expenses by employee. If I had bought something for a specific project, if I was a project-based type of purchase, I could tag that to a project. How does that apply to healthcare? Well, let's say you're building a new building. You're maybe rehabbing one of your clinics. You want to track all the expenses that are going into that office remodel or that office rehab. Set up a project. Tag everything that you do expense-wise to that project for office rehab, and then be able to report on that. At any point in time, you can see this is how much we've spent so far on this project. So giving you that ability to report is all of those dimensions that I've been talking about. So if we come back to this dashboard, you know, that's one way to get to the data, is through that drill down, getting down to those source transactions. Another way to get to the data, and what's important for Emma as a financial person, is she wants to look at profit and loss. She wants to look at balance sheet, the normal expected reports that you would see in a financial arena. She also may want to include some budgeting information. So she wants to compare actual to budget. So when we look at the profit and loss report, what we're looking at here is the ability to say, okay, I want to see how my facilities are comparing to one another. So I've put each one of them in their own column, and then I've done a consolidated column at the end. So this allows me to see them collectively. I can also come in and filter that and say, I just want to see one of them. So let's just take Texas. And now what we see is, we see that Texas, that entity Texas, has a couple of locations, Dallas and Riverside. So now what we've opened this up to is a hierarchy. So if you have an entity or company at the top, but you have other locations underneath that, you can see that each individual location, just like I see Dallas and Riverside here, but you see that those are connected to the overall Texas entity. So those roll-ups, those consolidations are done immediately for you. You can have as many locations as you choose to set up, and you might even think about this hierarchy as a parent-child. So think of Texas as the parent, think of Dallas and Riverside as the children. So as many children as you want to define, and as many parents as you want to define. And then you create that linkage between the two. So creating this view is all done with the financial report writer. So this is a report that was created with the financial report writer. And what this is going to allow you to do on the P&L side is to do that same type of drill down, except now we're looking at revenue instead of expenses. So I have split my revenue out between private, public insurance, and then private pay. So I don't have a lot of private pay. I'm kind of interested to know a little bit more about that. So now I can drill into that. Anything in blue is hyperlinked and you can drill into it. So I can see that that's from 2 invoices. And this is where I'm billing the patient or the resident individually, and their families are going to pay these invoices. I can drill into those transactions and I can see that this is a $39 charge. It's been paid. I can drill into that. I can also see what that is been coded to. So it's been coded to that private pay revenue. It was for a specific department and facility. And then if I want to know a little bit more about the details, I can get right to that invoice and I can see that it was for a shower chair. So that's what it was for. I know the details. I know where it was coded. If I am a financial person and I want to know the debits and credits, I can go to the posting detail and I can see all of the debits and credits that got impacted when I posted this invoice. Additionally, I can see a history tab that tells me exactly how this transaction happened. There were 2 steps in the process. It started as a sales order and then converted or got turned into a sales invoice. Additionally, I also have access to the cash receipt. So when the family paid this $39, I can see what bank I deposited it into and how that money was transacted. If it came in via check, I'll have that check number and so forth. So when I look at this information, one important takeaway here, I didn't have to call anybody. I didn't have to dig in a filing cabinet. I got all this information and I was sitting on the dashboard when I started this. So I just drilled into it and got to the level of information that I needed without any extra steps and without really needing anyone else's help. Now, there's a bunch of buttons that you're seeing up here at the top. I just wanted to point out a couple of them. If this is something that you immediately wanted to see on a dashboard, you could add it to a dashboard. If you were talking to that patient's family and for some reason they needed this document resent to them, you can print or email directly from this screen. So all these buttons give you that efficiency to make sure that you're not having to go back and forth and menu travel a lot without without having to put things in multiple places. You basically just push a button and you go exactly where you need to go. A couple of other things on the dashboard that I want to point out that are really helpful. We talked about month-end processing, and one of the things that I always had when I was part of that team was I had a checklist. And that checklist had all of the activities that we needed to do, all the tasks in order to close the month. So being able to create checklists, it can be all different kinds. I've created an end of month checklist or end of period. And then when I created that checklist, I also created some tasks, and those tasks became assignments, and I assigned those to people who then got emails letting them know what tasks they had been assigned to. In addition to that, it's helpful to know that when I close the books in Sage Intacct, I can close individual entities, so one by one, or I can close them in mass. So I can say I want to close all of my entities. And as I'm closing, I can also close by application. So typically I would be closing my subsystems first, like closing AP and AR first and then closing general ledger. And as I'm closing, I have a great visual here that tells me by entity, by application, whether or not it has been closed. So I don't have to ask anybody, have you closed AP? Have you closed AR for this entity or that entity? I have a view that gives me that information, and I put it right here on my dashboard. Now, along the way, I said there were several different dashboards. I created one specifically for the end of the month. I can create as many dashboards as I choose to. They can be permissioned. I can open them up to some people and close them to others. When I look at the end of month dashboard, I look at everything that I need in one place to close the month, all the different reports that I need to execute, the journal entries and things that I need to approve. I put everything right here on this dashboard, and that makes it easier for me to get to. If I am a department manager, I want my own dashboard, and I want the things that are important to me. So here, what you see in the AP manager is you see things that are important from an accounts payable perspective. Here's the AP trending, so you can do your grafting here. You also could have a list of all of your bills. You could graft your aging instead of just looking at the report. You may be that person that needs that visual. The visual is more powerful. So having things in a visual representation. You know, maybe there are certain vendors that you should be working with, approved vendors. Maybe you want to look at, you know, what payments have been posted and what activity has been posted in the AP account. So these are the things that are important to my AP manager. So as you look through here, there are role-based dashboards, and there are also dashboards that are more functional, like that end of month type dashboard. And there's also the ability to do workflow approvals in Sage Intacct. So if you're using purchasing or entering AP bills and you want to approve those before they get paid, I set up a workflow approval dashboard. And that way, all of my approvals are on one dashboard, because I have approvals in purchasing and AP. I also have approvals in other areas of the solution, like journal entries or employee timesheets or employee expenses. So having everything on a dashboard keeps it easy and simple for me to access. So that's a lot about reporting. But one of the things that is also important about reporting is being able to look at how you deploy those reports. So every financial report can be deployed different ways. You can print it, you can view it, you can push it out to a CSV file, you can format it in a PDF format, you can export it to Excel, and you can also schedule it with the scheduler. So think about, again, back to that month-end process. Do you put together certain reports and bundle those together and maybe send those to your board members or to your stakeholders? How do you do that today? Well, you know, someone sits down and they run all those reports, and then they go in and they create an email and they attach the reports to them. So now we're looking at a lot of time. So the scheduler allows you to set that up to run unattended in the background. So you pick the report or the reports that you want. You choose a start and end date, a frequency. You tell me who you want that report or that packet sent to. Intacct will do it automatically. You don't have to touch it again. So think about some of these things: the checklists, the dashboards, the scheduler, the flexibility of how you structure those reports. All of that ties into efficiencies and helping you be more strategic as opposed to being tactical. There's one other area that I want to touch on before we move back to just some additional metrics, and that is to come back to the dashboards and talk about outcomes for just a minute. You know, one of the things that we know is that it's not just about financial data, it's about operational data as well. So for some of you, you may be in a situation where you have a clinical system that has data in it that you'd like to bring some of that operational data into Sage Intacct and be able to include that in your reporting. So I've got a sample here. Just did a review with some folks that were in the skilled nursing area of healthcare. And so some of the things that are important to them are looking at revenue per caregiver. So we're tracking how many caregivers. We're tracking also how many resident days we have. And we're using some of this operational data to create reports that look at, revenue per day, per resident, and being able to look at, where are we gaining the most efficiencies and where are we on point. And we've done that by facility. So you can see each facility has its own set of numbers here and its own end result. We've also, grafted some of that information. So if you're more visual, what's the revenue per resident day? And we've, blocked this out into a monthly view. So this is the kind of information that, may be coming from another solution that you want to pull that in to Sage Intacct. And you can have any number of pieces of information. It might, it can be anything from, patients, doctors, supplies, anything that you want to track operationally. We can pull that in and marry that with financial information and get this type of an outcome view in a report that you can then put on a dashboard. Just closing up the session here today, just want to, focus a little bit on, having processes defined. So I switched over to Nikki real quick. Remember, Nikki's the one that doesn't have permission for everything. And this is an example of a process map in Intacct. You see a lot of things grayed out. I did this intentionally so you could see those are areas that Nikki can't get to. They are permissioned and she does not have permission to access those areas. All that Nikki is able to do is enter a requisition. If you look at this middle swim lane here and you see those yellow arrows, this is a best business practice that we've laid out. I'll switch back here so you can see the colors a little bit better. It's a best business practice in this middle swim lane. It's an automated business process flow, so no re-entering of data. But the good news is you get to define this process the way you choose to use it. How do you want to transact? What type of purchase orders do you have? Do you want a formal receiving step? How do you track variances between purchasing and AP? What does your accounting team need to do when they get that vendor invoice? We don't want anyone to have to re-enter information, so we're going to automate this for you. So these are the things that are going to help you thrive in 2022 instead of just survive. So Courtney, I'll let you take it back now and we'll come back to our slides. I want to hit a couple of metrics there around, how other customers are utilizing Sage Intacct and what some of those metrics are that they are utilizing in their business.
Okay, Linda, and I think our screen should be back up to our presentation.
Thank you so much. This is a little bit of a build slide. So as Courtney's building this, I'll just identify this is University Clinic Health. Excuse me. So if you look at the little blurb there at the top, a little bit about them. Their focus obviously is to deliver high quality care in the Mid-South. They are a longtime Sage Intacct customer. They had some issues that they brought to us. So prior to coming to Sage Intacct, they were losing cash because of growth, and they needed to look at how they were tracking their expenses. and didn't have a good handle on it. They also needed to have visibility into where they were profitable. So think about your practice. You may have different areas of your practice. In a specific office, you may have certain areas of healthcare being provided. So maybe it's an operation area, maybe it's post-op, maybe it's physical therapy, maybe it's, an ongoing wellness program area. So if you want to know where you're profitable, you've got to record data in that manner. If you want to know what specialties are costing you more, you've got to be able to gather the data and tag it to that specialty. So this is the way we looked prior to Sage Intacct. After Sage Intacct, here are some of the metrics that they saw. So they utilized the dimensions. So they took the dimensions to get reporting out by specialty and by department. So they took a dimension, they defined it as specialty, they identified the different specialties that they had, and then as transactions were entered, they tagged those transactions to a specialty, posted that transaction, created that dimensional data, and then were able to report on it. They improved their month-end close by 3 days. What does 3 days mean? Think about the number of people that are involved in your closing and do the math to see what those 3 days really saved them in dollars. And they also were able to grow and launch 2 additional medical practices. So what did that mean for, them recouping the money that they were losing prior to Sage Intacct? So these are real business results. If we go to the next view, we'll see that there's a lot of healthcare companies that are experiencing this type of outcome. So we've got customers, we've got the results, we've got really what is it that they needed. Remember I talked about that multi-entity environment, having everything in one instance of Sage Intacct. So as you look at this, you can see there was a lot of savings, whether it was in people savings, time savings, dollar savings across all of these different healthcare organizations. So the real question is, where are you in your journey? Are you going to thrive, or are you just going to hang on by your fingertips? Multi-entity businesses that thrive can accelerate their growth and accelerate profitable growth. You can see real-time information, so you can make better business decisions. You can free up your resources and improve your productivity. Our metric there is 20 to 35%. You can also be more nimble, more flexible, agile. You have a solution that's going to scale with you, that's going to grow with you. You're not going to go back through this software evaluation and selection process every 3 years, because this is a solution that's going to scale with you. So this is the type of solution that you want to be focused on, one that meets your needs today, tomorrow, and for many years in the future. So Courtney, I'm going to stop. I haven't given you a lot of time, but we do have a few minutes here. Any questions that we can answer today?
Thank you, Linda. So as Linda said, we are going to open it up for questions. So if you haven't already and you have any questions, please enter them into the questions section of the GoToWebinar. And I do think while you're presenting, we had a question or two come in. So Linda, the first question I'm going to ask you is, how can Sage Intacct help me reduce errors in my transactions before posting and reporting?
That's a great question. I wish that there was something that could help me make, eliminate me making mistakes in my day-to-day life as easy as it is in Sage Intacct. So one of the things that we're doing is we're utilizing technology, and we're utilizing it in a way that we're looking at the data, we're using artificial intelligence, and no, there's not robots that are going to come in and take over, but we are using AI, artificial intelligence, to look at the patterns in the data. And when we see something that's unusual, we're going to alert you to that. And we're going to do that before we post the transaction. And then that gives you the opportunity to review it, and if necessary, to change it, modify it, update it, whatever you need to do, fix it, for lack of a better term, before you approve it or post it. Now, how does that all happen? Well, it's happening behind the scenes. You do turn on that functionality. It's part of our native solution, and it basically is looking at the history of the data, and it's looking at the patterns of the data. So if it sees an account number combined with a specific department that it's never seen you use before, it's going to alert you to that. We call it an outlier, and that's just a fancy word for we've never seen this before, and we're going to make sure that it's right before we post it. So that's going to save you a lot of time.
That's great, Linda. And we also have another question. How can data from another solution, specifically a clinical solution, be integrated into Sage Intacct for reporting?
Another great question. And if you recall, when I was talking about the underlying architecture of Sage Intacct, I referred to it as a best-in-class model. The way that we're architected is open from an architectural standpoint, such that we can accept integrations of data from other best-in-class applications that have open architecture as well. Now, I know that's probably Greek to a lot of you. So the simple way of saying it is, when you have, I'll go back to that billing system. When you have a billing system that is, let's say, producing your resident invoices, you want those financial transactions to come into our financial engine. In simple terms, it's a mapping process. So I want the data from one system to be mapped into another system. Now, there's some tools and there are some techniques that we have developed that make that easy, that make that seamless, and it is a repeatable process. So we can set that up so that once it is set up and tested, it can be executed automatically. So you're not going back every day or every week and having to reinvent this move of data. You do that mapping, you do that testing, you validate everything looks good, then it gets set up to run automatically in the background based on a schedule. And this can be done on a daily basis, it can be done on a weekly basis. It really depends on what kind of data we're bringing in and how often you need to report on that data. So if you're doing financial statements every Wednesday, well then absolutely you want to have all the data in there so that when you run those financials, you have all of the data and everything is up to date from your other solution as well as from within Sage Intacct. So there's some planning that goes into that, but certainly we would tell you that 75% of our customers are integrating 2 or more other applications into Sage Intacct. So it is a common thing for us to do, and we're really, really good at it.
Great. Thank you, Linda. And I think that is going to be all of our questions for today. So I thank you everyone for your questions. And again, thank you so much, Linda, for a great presentation and for taking the time to be with us today and really give us those in-depth answers. I'd also like to thank everyone in our audience for attending the webinar today, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
All right, thank you. Bye now.